Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Unfinished Business Television. Pardon the appearance. It is very hot outside, so do not have my usual hat or jewelry on this week. I am your host, Jeff Galashaw at Unfinished B1 or B2, wherever you find us on social media. With me, as always, is Mr. AJ Epics himself, Andre Joseph.
The Cinefiles are back.
Yes, they are, because some of you might notice we have a guest who is quite a familiar face. We have with us this week Mr. Eric Cohen.
Hi.
Okay, and
Great to be
he's
back
with us.
talking films with my buddies. How are you guys doing? Unfinished business going strong?
Yeah, what are we
It's
now?
trying.
I know you landed some pretty impressive interviews recently, and yeah, thank you for carrying the torch.
No problem. Had no other choice, really.
You guys.
This week, well, for those who are still watching, we this week are going to talk about movies that are genre movies, but they have a little bit extra in the middle. They also tend to carry a social message of some sort, good or bad, or social commentary. And actually, was kind of Eric's choice, because initially we were just going to do a review of the menu, a deep dive. And Eric was like, hey, let's extend, let's go bigger. And, so he suggested the subject. And if I might ask you, Eric, why not just the menu? Why did you want more to talk about?
Well, it's my predilection. I can't pronounce the word. My want to kind of sabotage a show that I'm not normally a part of, because it's all about me. But I don't know, just like the menu is a dark comedic thriller, pseudo horror film, but really strong social message, and there's been a rich history of sort of like what I would call sugar with your vegetables style cinema, right? 1950s, we had a lot of like Cold War commentary films described as alien invasion movies and stuff like that. And it just seemed like there's an opportunity to talk about like great genre films. Horror and sci-fi in particular would get away with talking about some thought-provoking topics, right? By being presented as genre flicks. So you would buy your ticket thinking you're going to see like a cool horror film or an exciting sci-fi film, B movie, if you will, but snuck in there is an actual certain interesting messaging. And that's why I thought it'd be an interesting topic.
Okay. And so should we start off with the menu?
Let's talk about the menu.
Okay, the menu, which stars Ray Fiennes, or as some of you might read, Ralph. Also with Anya Taylor-Joy, Nicholas Hoult, John Leguizamo. It centers on a bunch of elite rich people who are invited to the chef's one-of-a-kind soiree for dinner. And, they all different kind of personality types. They come into the island and then slowly discover that they are there as kind of an experiment or even a project where the chef is basically going to kill them all. But they're going to have once in a lifetime exquisite meals. And of course, throughout the film, they don't believe it, or they try to make their own escapes or reason or have reasons for why they should not be killed, all to naught, essentially. And really the only one who's kind of presented as an innocent is Anya Taylor-Joy's character, who is the date of Nicholas Hoult, and she's basically an escort or call girl, and which greatly upsets Ray Fiennes when he finds this out, but nonetheless, she must die like them all. I will say, I guess when I saw this movie, I wasn't expecting all this. I knew it was a dark comedy. I knew, it was something that would probably skewer the elite, but I enjoyed what I got. It's not, for a film that's dark, it's not very violent. It's more, I would say, macabre. I quite enjoyed it. For one, I mean, we'll get into this later. I kind of like the ending, but I wanted a darker ending. But then again, even the ending is up for debate in some circles because everybody has their theory of it. And I know, Andre, this was a movie you've been wanting to talk about for the longest. So what in particular was, I guess, the special sauce that made you want to talk about this movie so bad?
Well, with the menu, I remember when it was advertised, and I was thinking it was another like Get Out type of knockoff, but with a very impressive cast. And just from the idea of it being set on an island and all these kind of rich upper crust people being there, and definitely looks like people are going to start getting killed off. I thought it was going to be like a cannibalism movie. That was the impression that I first got. Like nobody knew what this guy was actually making. But then once I did see it and realized there was something more going on here, then I really enjoyed it more, especially for the laughs and the different personalities, whether it's John Leguizamo doing his Steven Seagal impression or Janet McTeer being like this kind of like uppity food critic. And even Nicholas Hoult, it's like no matter what, this guy's not phased. He's just like a fanboy who just loves everything that Ray Fiennes is making, and just nothing really bothers him up until that moment he gets humiliated. And so, what it ended up becoming, which I liked and appreciated, was it really was like a commentary on, I guess, people consume so much in society, whether it's binge watching or, there's the idea of like something that Ray Fiennes says in the movie, like people don't take the time to savor and actually taste the food. It's just like they want to just eat, consume, criticize it. And I think that's saying something about society today. Just kind of like everybody wants everything in the instant gratification and not really like being present in the moment of time, and doing it within the context of this island and this whole setup of this high-end dinner. And of course, I had to talk to Eric about it because I know he's the big foodie between all of us, and figured he might have some appreciation for it because I think we've all kind of been there with those kind of like small portion dishes that not that's not for everybody.
I assume we can talk about spoilers.
Yeah, it was a spoiler
Yeah.
My impression of the menu, it's steeped in a rich tradition of dark comedies that ostensibly just deal with the need for clout, right? And this goes all the way back. I mean, there's a Roger Corman who recently passed away, right? His film Bucket of Blood, about an artist who's struggling to accidentally kill someone, turns him into a piece of sculpture and becomes an overnight success, right? And so for me, I didn't expect a cannibalism thing going into the menu. I figured it was going to be in that kind of tradition where, yes, there's this theme of the elites wanting to be part of elite experience, but mostly it's about clout. It's the clout of getting into that kind of experience where I related to it. Thank you, Andre, for outing me as a foodie, by the way. But we've hung out together, right, when we wanted to go to like an exclusive bar or a speakeasy of some sort. And part of the thrill is getting in and then having the bragging rights, right, of saying that we got in and experienced it, right? And that to me is what resonated with the menu, is that sense of, oh, we're part of this thing that no one else is, right? And we can Instagram it, we can brag about it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think the Nicholas Hoult character is very much the stereotype of the social media obsessed, clout obsessed. I am obsessed with this certain culture thing that it's almost a parasocial. Well, it isn't almost, it is. He has a parasocial relationship with Ray Fiennes, as we discover, right? To the extent where Ray Fiennes challenges him to make a meal, right? So that's what resonated with me, the whole sense of like a lot of these characters, like the John Leguizamo character, sort of a has-been. And he sees this as an opportunity to regain some of that clout, right? Um, and Janet McTeer's character represents the character can like give the clout or take it away, being the critic, right? But in essence, she's seeking clout by being a part of these experiences as well. So there's a lot of that. And then you have the Anya Taylor-Joy character, who's a fish out of water. It's supposed to be a surprise, I guess, a twist that she turns out to not be his like first choice. She's a hired escort, um, who's just doesn't get any of this, right? It's not a part of her world. Although I would question realistically, like these things are so like promoted through social media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think there could have been a savvier way to represent her character and her observations of what's going on. I think she would have a more sophisticated take than the screenwriters give her. I would say that I liked the film. I think Ray Fiennes is really good in it. But I felt like some of the problems of the film, like kind of like this, is that the targets seem to be too easy, and there's not enough nuance, we have characters that we don't really know much about other than the superficial things, like the finance crypto bros, who are they? Well, they are your stereotypical finance crypto bros, right? The judge and his wife, there was an interesting thing there where he's had affairs or something like that. But it's not clear why they deserve their fate, right? Like little things that just kind of represent the stereotypes. There's some very funny moments in it, right? Like Leguizamo's date. There's that comment about where'd she go to school, right? And they're like, you die, that was very funny. And I think there could have been some more interesting things to be said about not just, clout, but class structure. Like, what does it mean in the 21st century to be a part of the elite when now, you can be a part of the elite, but come up from like meager, a background, right? As opposed to someone who's born into wealth. And I would like to have seen more like a play in that. Like that joke I mentioned before was very funny, but I was like, okay, what else? That's interesting. That's an interesting thread. Let's pull on that a little bit. Okay, she went to a high-end college, but what was her background before that? Because otherwise, like I like the idea of challenging Ray Fiennes' plan here and his like his whole motivation behind it. But what do you think, Jeff?
I liked it. I guess I was sort of like Andre. I got the whole thing about, I guess, maybe making a commentary on, I felt like it was more a commentary maybe on movie going, from the filmmaker or cinema, because, again, you're an audience and you want everything like wham bam, but you don't take time to savor or notice the nuances in certain films, like maybe the script writing, the character arcs, or things like that. You just want to get to what it is. And since we all know that these characters most likely are going to die, because that's the plan, I feel like it's sort of like when watching a Final Destination. Like, people got so used to going to those types of movies, and they didn't really care about the characters or even the storyline. All they wanted was the death scenes. That's what they came. And again, there's no problem with that when you're going to a certain type of film where that's expected. But I feel like after a while, if you called yourself, let's say, necessarily a genre film like a horror film, that was what more people wanted to see. How is this person going to die? Or in what creative ways are the deaths going to? So I appreciated that this film kind of takes its time getting there and with the explanation. My thing, also, I like the little things like, what was it, with the cookies that they handed out, and obviously the judge recognizes Anya Taylor-Joy because I take it that his character has probably used her services. And if you look at the cookie, it kind of looks like, I guess, a caricature of her. So even though she wasn't supposed to be there, they obviously knew enough about his past to maybe recognize her. And of course, as I was saying before, the ending, I thought it was kind of the way it's based, it looks like it's a cop out, like she's going to survive and everybody else perishes. But now there's this theory that, which is the way I wanted it to end, that he probably poisoned her food. And so we just see her, take a bite, and then the camera, focuses on the sky or the island. I'm not sure exactly what. I haven't had time to watch it that recently. But, of course, she might have perished off screen. I wanted her, like, if I would have written the script, in my dreams, she would have taken the bite, and then we would have seen her, like, slowly, whatever poison or whatever was in there, and then slowly her fade. And then to me, that would have made it maybe a little bit more like a 1970s film where we have that dark ending. Whereas I feel like the way they did it now, it's like, oh, even though this is all dark and twisted, let's, make it light. And for those who wanted a dark ending, maybe it's ambiguous. But I wanted something down home dark, just like something like Little Murders or Where's Papa, only less comedic.
I don't know if I agree with that. I don't have a problem with the ending. I think it reached its logical conclusion. I just think this I I wish it were a little messier in its presentation. I get that it's the scripting and the editing and cinematography is meant to reflect the sort of obsessive compulsive nature of a chef. Everything's exact and all that stuff. But I felt like it was almost too pat, too like slick, too like too scripted, right?
Okay.
The fact that he pines for the days he was slinging hamburgers, right, in a diner or something like that, and that's what like saves her, right? She's like, I want a hamburger. And it begs other questions like, okay, she's on the boat. How they let her on the boat? Were they not supposed to let anyone escape? Did they somehow message the boat, no, she can go, all that kind of stuff. I think it makes sense that she survives, right? But I wish we had
Okay.
more of a sense of, well, I guess she didn't feel sorry for the people she left behind.
Yeah.
Or, we didn't get a sense of, we got the interaction between her and Nicholas Hoult. Obviously, she develops a lot of contempt for him, but we didn't get a sense of what she felt about everyone else in that circumstance or whether or not it was fair to them. You know what I mean? And because you had some characters there that weren't entirely unsympathetic. I didn't think John Leguizamo's character was particularly unsympathetic. The only reason why he was there is because the chef didn't like his movies, right? It was like an odd, I know it's meant to be funny, but I wish there was like more meat to that a little bit.
I would
But
say
that's just the way I think as someone that like appreciates like what I consider to be good storytelling. I just felt like there's little things there that were just convenient, as opposed to like, okay, what is this all about? Let's really examine this a little bit. We could probably get both comedic mileage out of this and pull something really disturbing and troubling out of it as well. And that's the thing. It's a film that feels like it's got more to say than it actually does, and thinks it's more disturbing than it actually is. I'm gonna say this right out. I hated that whole thing with the s'mores. At that point, it was like, okay, now we're in full fantasy mode because this right here, I think it would be like I wanted a messier ending where people are trying to revolt and it becomes this free for all violent thing where everyone might even be like to the point where everyone's killing each other off because they think it'll help them survive, kind of thing. And I just thought that thing where they're just sitting there, allowing them to put all these materials around them and then lighting them on fire. That just felt to me like a bit of a cop out, kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah, that I actually agree with you on that point. Rewatching it yesterday, I just felt like, particularly because the only time you actually felt like the staff was threatening is when Anya Taylor-Joy gets into the fight with the Asian lady over the barrel.
Hong Chau is great in this, by the way.
Yeah, no, she
She's
was
really good.
But yeah, I mean that's the only time where you'll actually see that they could be violent, but you never really get that sense all throughout. And yeah, they probably could have revolted towards the end, and then see it when you have like your tragedy. And then the other thing too was with Judith Light's character. I didn't see any reason for her to die. I mean, it was her husband that was messing around, and you didn't really know enough to know like why does she have to be in this circumstance.
That was weird to me too, because you had a great cast.
Yeah.
The cast across the board
Mhm.
were fantastic, and you have someone like her and Reed Birney, who's like a great character actor. And I just felt like there could have been more meat to their roles. I just felt like Judith Light, that's it. That's all. This is her part, and that's all she does. I felt like there could have been more to it. I was amused by something recently. I recently saw Roadhouse, the remake.
Yeah.
We can do a whole show on that. But I didn't realize the guy that stole the show for me in that movie is an actor named Arturo Castro.
Who I worked
He's
with.
one of the crypto
Yes.
bros, right?
Hmm.
I was like, wow, what a good little actor he is, man. He was entirely 180 from what he did in Roadhouse. But yeah, I just felt like certain characters stood out for me more than others. I felt like other characters were underwritten, and then I was like, well, why do they deserve their fate?
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. I find it an enjoyable film. I think there was obviously room for improvement ultimately, but I guess I would recommend it to anyone who is curious to watch it just to see what they think. Uh, Even with all your criticisms, Eric, would you recommend the movie?
I would stream it. I would recommend it as a streamer. I don't know if I'd recommend someone going to a movie theater and seeing it.
Oh no.
Especially with the
Oh.
economics, the way they're being with movie theaters, right? But
Hmm.
it's something I would stream. I would recommend. It's not a bad film. I think it's really entertaining. I kept with it from the beginning to end, not one point that I feel like it lagged. Um, I just it's a film that feels like it thinks it's smarter than it actually is.
Okay. Seen plenty of
This is a
those.
blacklist script, right? Am I wrong about that?
No, no, no.
I
The
believe it
menu,
is.
what the menu
Yeah.
wasn't on the blacklist? I think it
Actually, no,
was.
it was. I do
Well,
remember.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder what other scripts came out that, because this is one of those, like, I could tell by reading it, it's one of those scripts where like superheroes like, oh yeah, this is the one you got to make, right? Because it hits
Hmm.
all the dots, but then in execution, you're like, it's okay. It just like follows that formula that gets a script sold, right? And that's what it felt like to me watching this. Oh yeah, I could see why they made this. I could see how the pitch worked. I could see how this got on the blacklist. It hits all those notes that you want in a successful screenplay.
It feels like a film that also would have probably been more successful if it came from overseas. Yeah,
Yeah,
like if it wasn't an American film, because then people be like, oh, the studio they did this, like you had to pitch. But if it just seemed like something that came from overseas, I think it would have probably gotten more praise and maybe more of a notice.
is that? I wonder what this would be like. It was made by the guy who did Fear No Evil. That's
It would
just
have probably been,
not an American remake, right?
yeah, it probably would have like that film been buried so that they could do the American remake and then be like,
Have you
hey,
seen
you
Fear
guys
No
should.
Evil? Have you seen it is you literally want to cut your wrists after watching that film. It's a dark, 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 dark comedy. And the American
No.
guy's version of the trailer just came out like last month. And
Hmm.
already they're giving away everything in a trailer. And the whole point of the movie
Oh,
is you have no idea what's going on. It's a slow burn. And just like I can tell what this American remake is going to be like.
no, no. Unfortunately, I didn't see it. Andre, did you see Fear No Evil?
No, I have not.
Okay. Um. Okay. So,
That might fall under the social messaging
Fear
disguised
No
as a
Evil.
thriller kind of thing. But yeah. But it's
Okay.
very cultural thing. It's a very Scandinavian kind of the whole premise behind it is the absolute obsession with being polite.
Mm.
That's basically
Okay.
what the message of the film is, to your own detriment, right? Not rocking the boat kind of thing.
Oh,
That's all
okay.
I say. I don't want to, you guys haven't seen it, so I don't want to give it away. But yeah, that's why I'm curious to see how they're going to Americanize it because it's so steeped in the culture of where like the main protagonists come from in terms of like politeness of their society and all that stuff. Whereas we got like Americans, we don't really have that kind of cultural background. Um, yeah,
Yes, we're just rude. We don't care.
we are.
Of
We're
course.
rude.
And, okay, so what are okay? I'll ask you guys. I have a list of my own, but feel free. Name some, I guess, movies that you feel were genre, but also had something a bit extra, I guess, to say about society.
There's one I want to particularly recommend, but before I get to that, I'm going to mention a dark horse that I think would make a good double bill with the menu.
Okay.
Came out in the 1990s. It's called The Last Supper.
I've
And it
seen
was
that film.
ostensibly it was written off as a shallow grave ripoff when it came out. And to a certain extent, it probably wouldn't have gotten made if it were not for Shallow Grave. But I think it was like sort of an Americanized Shallow Grave. But it deals with a bunch of like grad students in America, somewhere in the Midwest, who basically invite despicable people over for dinner and try to get them to try to find a humanity in them. And when they decide they can't, they kill them and bury them in the backyard, right? And it has like a really interesting cast. I think it was one of Candace or Cameron Diaz's first films. If I remember correctly, Ron
Courtney
Perlman is
B.
in it.
Courtney B. Vance is in it. And
Courtney B. Vance, yeah. And it's an interesting film. I think it didn't do well when it came out. Didn't see it recently. I saw it like maybe a year ago and thought it was
okay.
better than I expected to be, smarter than I thought it was. It's very reminiscent of something like The Hunt, where you've guys seen that, right? The Hunt came out a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, right? Where, ostensibly you want to be on the side of the grad students because they're the liberals, right? And the people they invite are these like right-wing, undesirable people, and you find yourself being a little more sympathetic to the undesirables. So it's this more of a commentary on bipartisan or partisan kind of like attitudes towards things and a refusal to like listen to the other side and how one side thinks they're superior to the other. And done as a very, very dark comedy. So that's something that would probably make a good double bill. And a film that recently came out, we were texting back and forth about this, What You Wish For with Nick Stahl, which is a really interesting film. I was somewhat pleasantly surprised by it. It's very similar in some ways to The Menu, where that's about a down on his luck chef who runs into an old friend, finds out his friend has this phenomenal life as a very successful chef where all he does is cook up private dinners for the rich and wealthy. And I won't say anything more than that because there's a bit of a talented
Okay.
Mr. Ripley thing going on there. But then there's the dinner. Like the good chunk of the film is this dinner that's being prepared and what that is and what the whole reason for it is for these wealthy people. And that's all I'll say because I don't want to give it away. But it's a pretty solid thriller, and it's got some pointed things to say about, how far are we willing to go for that piece of the American pie, right? To be successful. And yeah. So those are the films I would say kind of fit in with the menu, kind of
Okay.
deals with culinary stuff, social commentary, dark comedy, thriller, right? And then I'll tell you what my recommend is after you guys talk about yours.
Okay. Andre, what is your recommendation?
Well, I mean, I hate to go all Hollywood, but I want to kind of go back to the very beginning for me, looking at a film in a different lens today than I did as a kid. It has to be the original RoboCop. As a kid, you looked at it as a superhero movie of a cop who dies in the line of duty and becomes a cyborg and gets back at the killers that turned him into what he is, and he can't go back to being human. But when I look at it now, it's pretty scary to look at, you know, how they were viewing capitalism in the 1980s in a lens that unfortunately we're kind of living in right now, where the rich keep getting richer, everything's getting privatized, and it really is increasingly more cutthroat in this society that we're in today. And they were pretty much putting up that mirror back in 1987. So like today, when I look at something like the scene in the boardroom with Edward 209 blasting the executive, I'm not bothered by the violence as much as I'm bothered by this guy's like suddenly scrambling to get out of there, and everybody's pushing him off to the side so they don't get into the way of gunfire. And that to me is pretty freaky to see. And you know, and I think it was saying a lot about consumerism. It was saying a lot about how, you know, society can take somebody and, you know, they could take everything away from you, like your family, your livelihood, but they can't take away like what's inside of you deep down, your core. And that's what's representative of Alex Murphy, is that they try to turn him into this cyborg that they think they can control, but as his memories start to come back, you know, it becomes a thing where he eventually overrides the system that they built for him so he could be that honest cop again. I mean, I could go on about it, and it's something that I think the sequels kind of lost in the TV series and everything else after that. But that original still holds up today.
Okay.
It particularly reflects the militarization of the police, right? That was happening around that time and continued through the Clinton era.
And still does to a certain extent.
Oh yeah.
Mhm. Um, I have a twofer, but later I want to talk about one that particularly fails. But for right now, I'm going to say I'm going to go a little Hollywood like Andre with my first one. The People Under the Stairs by Wes Craven. And I saw this when I was probably 12 years old. So I'm not going into a movie looking for a message. I was more like, hey, it's a little black kid as the star, so it's like I can identify with this. Then obviously goes into like kind of a haunted house, by these two crazy rich white people who are making all this money by, closing, I guess, the projects or where a lot of low income housing is. And you find out that, I guess, to kind of go with what Andre thought, they literally are, spoiler alert, cannibals, who also like to keep up this certain look as rich people. So they're adopting children, and whoever they deem not respectful, they basically just throw them into the basement to be kind of, I don't know if they're just malnourished or kind of mutated, because some look, normal, and then some just look like, oh, I don't know what, like almost zombie-like, but they're not. But I like the film, and I know like Wes Craven, George Romero, they always like to put social messages in their movie. But what I also notice about this film, thinking about it, is that really the only people who die who are not white is really Ving Rhames. He's the only person of color who dies in the whole film. And in fact, they even use his body as a prop later to scare other people off. But I always admired that in the film. That is why when they keep talking about remaking it, I'm like, okay, if you can the same things are still going on, but if you can make it in some way more modern, then do it. But I just don't want it to end up like another Candyman, where it's like, oh, you said you were going to modernize it, but it's kind of a little bit more disappointing because it makes no real sense.
I wonder a way to successfully remake People Under Stairs today, if you have it especially set in a place like New York City or something like that, get into the whole the big problem now is the lack of housing, right? And although technically there is available housing, landlords are sitting on it. They're not making it available, right? They make more money off of keeping it unoccupied, right? And then you have all this news that's coming out about this. I'm not going off a tangent, believe me, I'm not. This is really, but the news, there's news that's come out about this software that the real estate industry uses, especially for multifamily homes, which creates a algorithm that determines the rental rates of homes, right? Specifically apartments.
Okay.
And they use that to jack the prices, and they make everyone in the real estate industry agree to those prices. So they've effectively created a cartel. So as a result, only a percentage of people can afford to rent an apartment in places like New York, Washington, Chicago, whatever, because of this one thing. And I think there could be an interesting, horror movie using that as the backdrop, right? Say family trying to find a home to live, and their only option is to share that home with someone if they want to live, because they don't have a car or it's hard to travel. Most people, in order to find an affordable home, they have to commute at least an hour, maybe more, from where they work in order to live somewhere affordable nowadays, right? So I think that that's a way you can sort of modernize it, kind of figure out how to, use that as the background of that. But I agree. I think People Under Stairs is a great example.
Yeah,
I would say, I don't know if there's like another film you're going to bring up, because you mentioned one that's not as successful. You weren't going to talk about Serpent in the Rainbow by any chance, were you?
Oh, no. It's not by the same
Wes
director.
Craven had some interesting political ideas, right? And Serpent in the Rainbow is not I don't think that's a successful example of that. I think it's a real failed attempt at doing what I think he was trying to do, where he was ostensibly trying to do this like sort of supernatural horror film involving voodoo, right? But the real story is the political situation in Haiti, and who are the real oppressed and who are the real oppressors. And you have this Bill Pullman character kind of represents the white sort of like colonialist slash imperialist that's just going to go in there and get this like special magical drug for the pharmaceutical companies, right? And it just and the film just seemed to cheapen the message a little bit in its presentation and all that stuff. But I think that's an example, like same director, concept didn't work as well, whereas he has this other film where the concept works really, really well. I'm really glad you brought that film up.
Well, thank you. Actually, the other film I was going to mention is more recent, and unfortunately, I feel like this one isn't as successful with maybe its social message, and it's Sorry to Bother You by Boots Riley. This one is a little more absurdist than the movies we've talked about, where basically it's about a guy down on his luck who gets a job in advertising sales and finds success from using his so-called white voice, which is dubbed by David Cross. And, throughout the film, he keeps getting success and moving up the ladder. And of course, the film's like, at what cost? And, because he has like an activist girlfriend who ends up leaving him over this. His coworker is secretly the leader of some renegade group, played by Stephen Yeun. And then I think everything goes well until the last act with, spoiler alert again, where basically Armie Hammer's idea is to turn people into horses, literal workhorses. And that's where, I think that's where the director kind of loses the audience. I mean, I get what he was trying to say with that, but again, seeing it in the flesh, that's where it's just like, oh, it's sort of, think of maybe Tusk by Kevin Smith, the same thing. Everything's interesting till you actually see what Justin Long looks like as a half waltz. And it's just like, okay, that's a guy in a rubber suit. So where's the actual hybrid? So, but Sorry to Bother You was the other film I wanted to bring up, as I guess could sort of go on this, maybe not a double bill, but those would be movies with social messages you might want to check out. And I'll also just throw this out. Any movie George Romero pretty much made and wrote, they all have social messages in one shape or form. So
I'm going to say, Andre mentioned RoboCop. I'm going to say almost every film made by Paul Verhoeven, right?
Oh, totally.
I would agree. Yeah. What was the social message in Hollow Man?
Oh, that's true. Maybe that's his one true, just purely commercial for the sake. I don't know.
I feel
You-
we could throw
Yeah.
something in there.
Playing God
Yeah.
is not good. I don't know.
Yeah, I was hoping you guys had the answer going to tell me because I'm like,
Uh,
I'm failing to think of one.
because I was here ready to. I was ready. You're going to mention a title. I was here. I was ready to like defend Showgirls and say, "Oh no, there's social messaging in Showgirls. There
Yeah,
really is."
No, not great acting by the lead, but there is a message in it.
Now, the film I wanted to recommend, and I know this is one that not a lot of people have seen or even heard of, but those who have pretty much universally praise it. I remember seeing it a few years back when we used to contribute to This Is Infamous, and I wrote about it.
Hmm.
And it's a really cool film. It's called Punishment Park, uh, and it's made
Hmm.
by a
I've seen it.
filmmaker. Sorry,
No, I
what do you
just said
think?
I've seen it.
I've
I
Oh, you
seen
have
just was
seen
just
it?
saying
yeah.
yes.
Oh, cool. All right. Awesome. So just a little background for our audience members who may not be aware of it. Peter Watkins, who directed, is a British filmmaker, and he was one of the pioneers of, I guess, what we call mockumentary cinema, found footage, whatever you want to call it. One of his first films he did for the BBC, I think it was BBC, maybe it was ITV. Uh, he was most famous for a film called The War Game, which was sort of a mockumentary take on something that would eventually become like Threads or The Day After, about, nuclear war,
Mm.
what it's like to live after one. And he did another film called Culloden, which is it takes like a famous battle in the 1600s in Britain and presents it as if there was actual media at the time covering it, right? And Punishment Park takes place in an alternate 1971 reality setting one where Nixon has made it illegal to protest against the Vietnam War. And if you're caught, you go in front of a tribunal, you will almost certainly be sentenced. And once you are, you have the option to either spend 10 years in prison or endure Punishment Park, which is this long stretch of desert land where if you manage to get from point A to B without either being caught or killed by the local militia, by the National Guard or state troopers, and you make it there free and square, then you will be let go, right? And this is done in a form of a mockumentary. We follow two sets of people. We follow people who are trying to survive Punishment Park, and we follow people who are facing the tribunal. And I think this is a really interesting film. It's a very angry movie, is the way I would describe it. And there's moments in it that I think are genuinely chilling. But I glad that you guys saw it. What are your thoughts on it? This is something I would recommend.
I would say first off, I mean, I know it's a little bit off tangent with something like, say, Civil War that was kind of dealing with, American insurrection and what would happen if we actually had a modern day Civil War. But I feel like watching Punishment Park, that's the movie that Civil War should have been. It should have been that scary, that grounded, and basically, it wears the social commentary on its sleeve without it being, kind of sugar coated. Because I said before, like when we were doing a thing about Civil War, that I felt like there were times where they tried to inject this humor, some of the pop music in there, and I feel like there were just those things that kind of took away from the actual like this could really happen and this should scare the shit out of you. And it just instead started coming off like a typical Hollywood production, whereas this was more like you said, like a more of a mockumentary, but done in a way where every time you're watching, like, let's say, the protesters standing in front of the tribunal, all I kept thinking was Chicago 7. And that was like a couple of years after that, and thinking about the infamous trial that they had, and even like towards the end with the black dude being held down by the military, and what they did to the gentleman that was on trial for the Chicago 7 riot. Those were sort of the things that I felt that really made it gripping. and real. And again, you don't have any stars in it. It's basically bare bones production. And absolutely, like, the political statement that it makes is still relevant now, talking about insurrection and the powers of what a president can do if they actually abuse their power and goes unchecked. So yeah, this was definitely like, I thank you for recommending it because it was really some heavy shit.
I'm glad
Uh,
you mentioned the fact about like protests like that, because it's one of those films where, like, just when I'm afraid it's going to come off as dated, something happens
Yeah.
in the real world. Like all the protests are happening on campus right now with what's going on in Israel and Gaza, right? You're having a crackdown on those protesters and how the media is sort of spinning it that, oh, there's bad apples in their group, not that people are protesting against them and how they're being shut out. The thing I also like, I think that some of the critics I've read that have written about Punishment Park, they tend to focus on how unfair uh, the protesters are being treated, right, in a tribunal. And yes, there is a sense that, well, it's not a sense, the whole thing's rigged, right? But you do have that whole part where, like, the members of the tribunal are also arguing amongst themselves. And I thought that, especially like during a period of like what we've been experienced from the past 4 years, from the Trump administration, COVID, the George Floyd protests, all that stuff. Here we have this situation that feels so immediate and current, where you have these two sets of people just shouting at each other, but no one's listening to each other. And that for me felt very powerful within those sequences. And then you have the stuff that's going on, the more like, exploitative moments, like when they're actually out in Punishment Park trying to survive. And there's that moment where the cameras are fixed on the patrolman trying to tell the guys that were trying, I don't want to say escapees, the ones that were caught, and they're like, okay, we want you to put your hands down and stop moving, and they won't stop moving. They keep going up the hill. No, stop moving. And you're like, oh shit, something bad's going to happen. What's going on here? I think it's a very well-directed film as well.
yeah,
Jeff,
agreed. Well, I mean, I'll admit I haven't seen it in probably over 5 years, but I remember watching it. I remember enjoying it, and as Andre mentioned, I remember the scene with the military holding down the black guy as one of the most memorable scenes of the film, because he won't, I guess, stop talking or protesting while he's supposed to be sitting there quiet, and the tribunal is in judgment of him. I remember enjoying it, but I can't say like I remember it all that well, like certain other parts and aspects of the film. But I do remember I did enjoy it, and it was quite shocking watching it because, as Andre mentioned about the Chicago Seven, I felt like some of the scenes or some of the characters were based on characters from the Chicago Seven. So I did enjoy it, and I think it's definitely a film I think more people should discover, whichever way they can find it. So, but I am going to also ask Andre, do you have another film or more films that you would recommend?
Oh yeah. Another movie that also comes to mind that I think over the years is starting to gain more talk and more of a following is They Live, John Carpenter's They Live. Because at the time when it came out, obviously Roddy Piper, WWE legend, everybody saw this as just, hey, Roddy Piper is getting into movies and he's doing an action film where he fights aliens. And, it was basically, I don't want to say it was past John Carpenter's peak period, but, he was coming off of like Big Trouble in Little China, and then he was started to do like more smaller films like Prince of Darkness, where he wasn't spending as much money and trying to get back to sort of the creativity of his earlier works. And so this was one of those movies that just felt like, a standard action programmer, but over time, people kind of caught on to what it was really about, which was his commentary on the Reagan era, as the rich kept getting on richer and use all sorts of subliminal messages through advertising, through programming on television to get people to consume and to buy more so that the powers of the corporations and the advertisers can, increase their wealth while everybody else at the bottom is getting poorer and they can't have any upward mobility in society. So seeing somebody like Roddy Piper be, kind of this blue collar drifter that in the beginning seems to still have this idea of what America should be and chasing the American dream, all of a sudden, as soon as he gets those glasses and sees what's really going on, that's when he needs to put a stop to it. And in the end, it's like he gets far enough that he can expose it, but it's still out there. And I think the Matrix definitely took a lot from it as far as the idea of here's society, but then here's what's really going on in the underbelly of it. But that movie in particular, I think, had a lot more to say with a lot more subtlety, even within the action sequences, the famous fight with Keith David, and some of the famous one-liners. I came to kick ass and chew bubblegum. There's just so much more going on, and I'm glad it's one of those movies that people are starting to talk about more and more over the years.
Obey has become a meme.
Yes.
Become a cultural. my fondest, my whole takeaway from I agree with you on They Live. My big takeaway from it is that when that came out, I think I was like late teens or something like that, and I kept calling it They Live because it amused me.
Well, I will say, again, I have a twofer here, but I'd like to go on not a rant, but one that I think a lot of people point out that I don't agree with about being a genre film with a social message, maybe. Saltburn, or as I call it, Talented Mr. Ripley Jr. Because that's basically that. Sorry, spoilers alert. That's what the film basically is, and it has this thing of fuck the rich, but it's like, your main character is successful, right? So he's not poor. So again, I just wanted to mention that one, but that's not what I'm recommending. One I would recommend, one is way too easy. Society.
Oh, I was going to mention that as one of my recommends.
Yeah, I've seen
Take
this
it away,
a few
Jeff.
years. Well, you probably have more to say about it, but I've only seen it recently. Basically, I believe is it Billy Warlock is the main character, the actor? No, well, either way, it's about
I just
a young
know Brian
man.
Yutzna directed it. That's
Yeah. Well, good thing you mentioned the director because the director was blanking on. But basically, he wakes up. He's a rich privilege, and he notices that everybody around him is different and strange. And then, literally later in the film, we discover that I believe he's adopted. Correct?
Yeah.
And that basically all these rich and successful people are all these weird kind of mutants who literally eat and fuck each other. So it's not very subtle, but oh man, it's more than basically what I said. And you really have to see it. It's one of those you have to see to believe because it's a special effects marvel, but it also has a lot to say about what the title says, society. And I remember I avoided this film for years because I just knew it was like, oh, it's one of those really gross horror films. But after I grew up, I decided to give it a chance, and I'm glad I did. I think it's something that's worth seeing, but I will say if you don't have a strong stomach, don't watch it.
It's very much a satire comedy, or at least it's trying to be. I think it's really out there and trying to present its humor to the point where it's like sometimes like we get he's adopted, but man, his parents are mean to him and he's mean to them. And, nobody seems to like each other very much in this movie. But Brian Yuzna, for anyone watching this, he produced like Reanimator and, From Beyond, those films. And he directed some of the H.P. Lovecraft adaptations and things like that would come out after that. But I don't think this is his first film, but it's one of his
No,
like his turn to direct like this like sort of fucked up kind of horror comedy kind of thing. After having produced The Reanimator and From Beyond. But yeah, I think that's a good choice.
thank you. And the other one, I guess I'm sticking in the horror genre. Funny Games by Michael Haneke, the original, not the
Heineke,
remake.
Michael
Haneke.
Heineke.
It's a German film.
I'm sorry, Henneke.
Okay, I'm not going through all these iterations.
There's no I in it. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. But it's a basically, it's not really basic, but it's a film where two young men basically come into a house asking all these questions and take the family hostage. And what I enjoyed about the film is that I didn't know that much going into it, but also throughout the film, the audience kind of comes complicit in everything that's happening on screen, as even they break the fourth wall and even ask the questions to the audience and looks at the audience. But also, the most memorable scene is the fake out. It is towards the end. Well, I don't want to ruin it for the audience, but just many times when you think it's going to be a happy ending or, a typical film, the film changes its dynamics and totally changes. Not so much that, it's a different genre, but enough that you're going to be disappointed. And I really enjoy the film because I guess when I was younger at the time and seeing it, I didn't know you could do that as a filmmaker. It was like, wait, you could do this? That's not fair. And so I know for some audience members, they might feel like it's the equivalent of like one of those mysteries where the whole time you're guessing who the killer is, and then they bring in some character 5 minutes before the end and be like, oh, it was him. That might be how some people might feel about the film. But I feel like this film is something, again, that challenges you and not only makes you complicit, but pretty much almost makes you an accomplice in all of this. And again,
the
it
American
goes to
remake
that
is actually
audience that was
pretty
like, what?
decent. It's actually the American remake is actually pretty good. I mean, it's a shot-for-shot remake by the same director.
Well, I mean, I guess I don't feel it's as powerful. Maybe it's because when you see the original, it's the original, and also there's no stars in it. So
Right.
you don't have certain expectations when you see Tim Roth and Naomi Watts. You kind of have thoughts of them as actors, or you're able to separate. Oh, this is the actor. This is the character. Whereas when you're watching the first film, if the actor isn't much known, you just think of them as the character, like you're really watching almost like a documentary. So that was my other film that I wanted to recommend, and not to go on a Emerald Fennell rant.
You actually,
Or else,
Jeff, remind me of another film I guess I would throw out there. It's got a lot of like it does have its fan base, but may not be well known by the general masses. It was a found footage film from the early 1990s called Man Bites Dog. Do you know this film? It's a French film.
oh, I've seen it. I have it on Criterion.
It's a mockumentary
Mhm.
where a film crew is following a serial killer, basically. And it's a very dark comedy. And it's one of those things where we, as the audience, the film crew is us, we're the audience, become complicit, literally, in what he's doing. And so I think it'd make a kind of a good double bill with Funny Games.
Oh yes, yes, especially towards again at a certain point in the film, it flips, and then you're like, oh, it's very shocking. Andre, have you seen Man Bites Dog or Funny Games?
I heard of Funny Games. I never got to see it.
Oh, okay.
If you don't, there's something that happens that's famous, like the film is known for.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you don't already know what that is, don't look it up.
Okay.
Okay. Let's just say there's some
those are
major fourth wall breaking in this film, and then you realize what the director's trying to say with this movie at that point. It's actually it's one of those like moments in cinema where I was like, that's fucking amazing when I saw that the first time. So yeah, I think you should check it out. I'd be curious to see what you think of it.
no spoilers on those two here.
Yeah.
And Andre, do you have another film on your list you'd like to mention or talk about?
Yeah, I actually have two, and I would put these on a double bill because I think they kind of have the same DNA. So the first I would say, even though it's more a reflection of the film industry, I think it still reflected that period, and I don't think it's completely changed. And that's Hollywood Shuffle, with Robert
Okay.
Townsend, his breakthrough movie that he spent all his credit cards on to produce on his own. And I think there was something to be said for him to be playing basically an avatar of himself as a struggling actor who gets his big break to play, of all things, a pimp in a movie. And throughout the film, he has all these fantasy sequences of the kind of performances he would really love to do. Right, he would want to, play the parts that Stallone and Schwarzenegger or Humphrey Bogart would play, like all the famous white actors would have. But for black actors, it's either you have to play a stereotype to get respect, or you have to be the next Eddie Murphy. And we're talking, mid 80s here. So, there's something poignant about the ending where he does take the job, but then realizes, how it's starting to reflect on his own people and decides, what, this is not for me. This is not worth the paycheck. And then, at the end, spoiler, he takes a job playing a postman in a commercial and doing it as himself. So there's obviously some individualism that's going on there thematically, but also something to be said about the industry at that time and the view of how they perceived Black America and how they had to depict it and double down on those stereotypes rather than uplifting. And of course, now we have so much diversity in cinema. In some ways, that's good, and in other ways, it just feels like a check on a box and not really any true depth or substance to those characters other than just say, oh yeah, we have inclusivity and we could pat ourselves on the back. And then the other movie that I think goes kind of in the opposite direction but still within the same lines of a comedy is a movie we did a deep dive on, and that was Living Large with TC Carson. Now there's a film of, now you have this young black aspiring guy who wants to be a reporter, and he gets that opportunity when he sees there's this robbery going on. He grabs the guy's camera. He starts filming himself during the hostage situation, and as a result of that, he gets a job as a newscaster. But the thing about it is, he gradually is told, like, you can't be yourself. Like, you can't have the dreads. You cannot talk like you're from the street. You have to dress in Brooks Brothers suits and speak eloquently. And, even at first, he's still trying to, do the kind of stories that his community would like to hear about, about white America, or about, just things that concern them. But then gradually, their stories start to turn against the black community, like the one scene where he outs like one of his friends' businesses. And so, there's something to be said there that I think we said before. This sort of predated Get Out, with him watching the TV and gradually seeing himself turn white, which used to freak me out as a kid. But also looking at it now and seeing how much they were trying to, strip away this kid's identity to be like every other uppity person on television. And only towards the end, when they're like, now we're forcing you to marry this white weather report lady who doesn't give a shit about him, just wants an opportunity. That's where it's like the red line is crossed. So I think that's another movie that, I mean, as much as Hollywood Shuffle gets a lot of play and respect now, more people need to see Living Large, because that one I think really predates a lot of the movies we have now, especially in comedy.
Who directed it?
Agree.
That was Michael Schultz. In fact, that was the last theatrical film that he did, because after that it was all television.
Okay, I'll check that out.
Yes, you should check out
more.
that episode. Okay, go ahead.
The Platform came out a couple of years ago. Don't know if you saw it. It's on Shudder. Spanish film.
I saw it.
And that the premise. Did you guys see that? Have you seen that? No? Yeah. Okay. So
I've seen it.
so we've all seen it. So just for the audience, premise is some sort of dystopian country. We don't know where, what, and a man is put in prison, and the prison is set up so that it's on levels. And if you're fortunate enough, you're on a high level, if you're unfortunate, you're on a low level. And the idea is that the way you're fed every single day is this big platform descends from the top down. And if you're at the top level, you're lucky enough to get the best of the feast. And if you're stuck at the very, very bottom, then you're lucky if you get anything, right? Sometimes what you get is worse because people are puking on the tables and stuff like that, and you're dealing not just with scraps, but people's messes, right? And it's like, and this whole like society kind of exists within this prison of like who you can deal with or sometimes who you can have sex with to be on a better level than the one you were on before, or what you can do that could screw yourself so you wind up being set down to the bottom. So it's a very interesting film. I think they just made the sequel.
No, I didn't even know.
But that's one that kind of falls within the what we're talking about.
I guess well, of course, have plenty on the list, but one that it's not particularly a genre film, but I think it kind of questions and sends up things we've seen in film. I don't know if any of you have seen Half Nelson with Ryan Gosling.
I never finished watching it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't say
basically
it's a genre film, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, I don't know exactly if it's a genre, but I guess it's kind of its own little send up of the white savior film where you have, Ryan Gosling as this heroic teacher, but then we also find out he's like a crack, and basically he's trying to mentor and steer this young girl off the streets from working for a drug dealer played by Anthony Mackie. But, Anthony Mackie obviously wants her to be this like drug runner for him. But looking at his lifestyle, everything's calm, cool, collected, put into place. He's not an addict. He's running a successful business, even though it's illegal. And here you have Ryan Gosling, fighting against him, and his home life's just a mess. He's a drug addict. And, he comes off worse than the people he's trying to help in the film. And I thought that was an interesting take, and it also it flies in the face of all these movies like Dangerous Minds, where it's, white savior teacher who comes in and solves everybody's problems. And by the end of the film, Half Nelson, I mean, spoiler, nothing's really that resolved. Everything's kind of still a mess. And, it's not obviously, since Andre only watched half of it, it's not for everybody, nor is it like one of the greatest films you're gonna watch. But I think it's an interesting take on familiar territory.
So, have you guys been watching The Boys this season, the current season?
Mm-hmm.
They have a dig at that kind of thing. He said Will Ferrell has a cameo, and he's playing sort of the white savior teacher type in this movie in the movie, and they totally make fun of that concept.
I haven't started. I just started watching.
It's nothing to spoil. It's just they're making a movie based on A-Train's life, but it's a fictionalized thing where he's like stuck in the hood and he's with the bad people. And Will Ferrell, his white coach, comes in and tries to like, come home with me. Come home with me. And the whole thing is like, this isn't what happened to my life. This isn't like the truth, So anyway.
Okay. Well, that was my last recommendation. Do you guys have last recommendations, at least for this episode?
I do. I'm going to say Enemy Mine is my last recommendation, not just because Louis Gossett Jr. just passed, but because I think it's a really good allegory for racism, and especially, ironically, Dennis Quaid being in this film, being like the American space pilot stuck on this planet with this alien of a race that humans don't like, and they have to survive with each other. And then, because the Louis Gossett Jr.'s race, they could have babies on their own. Dennis Quaid becomes the adopted son, the adopted father of Scott Jr.'s kid, and then has to protect him from these white miners that are taking and enslaving these aliens. I know it's like on the nose with its themes, but I think it's one of those movies that, you know, people seem to really appreciate over the years because of the fact that the makeup is really good, the themes are there. Yeah, the third act is a little clunky. There's some stuff in there that's a little bit dated, you know, with the effects and the creature effects, but I think it's a pretty solid film that was trying to be profoundly deep at a time when you just had like your basic popcorn flicks, and this actually had something to say. Unfortunately, it's being remade, but hey, you know, I'm not surprised that's happening.
I've got one more film to recommend. Come to think of it,
Okay.
gonna change things up a little bit. And I can't remember, I can't remember if we discussed this. I think we discussed it during our film noir episode, back in the Cinephile days. But Kiss Me Deadly, the 1959 Robert Aldrich Mike Hammer movie. I'd said it before, I'll say it again. It's sort of the Quentin Tarantino film before there was a Quentin Tarantino film, because the whole film is basically this subversive take on noir tropes. I would call it the first of the neo-noir film, right? Might have jump-started a neo-noir movement where, you know, you had noir, which weren't self-consciously noir. It's just that that was a label slapped onto that bit of a genre, right? And then you had films that started to come out where like, oh no, we're going to comment on noir by being a noir, sometimes make fun of it, sometimes pay homage to it. Even subvert the ideas. And, you know, you go into this film thinking you're going to see this typical kind of hard-boiled detective thing, and it's this like crazy commentary on post-atomic age, also this whole like sort of like criticism of masculinity and what that must mean to people like in the late 1950s and stuff like that, because you have a lead character who is anything but the hero, even though he's supposed to be the hero. And you have this like insanely like weird, ambiguous ending where you think it's the end, it's the end of the world, you know, and no one saved anything. And I think it's just a very interesting film. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, but I think it falls in with the genre film with an underlying message, and I think a very subversive one at that for its time.
Well, I know, obviously, Quentin Tarantino borrowed from the film.
Oh yeah,
like with the
among
briefcase,
other movies.
you know, of course. And well, he doesn't go after one target. So I guess that unfortunately brings us to the end of this episode.
Oh,
thank you, Eric Cohen. Thank you, Mr. Cohen, for finding it time in your busy schedule to join us on this week's episode.
Thank you for having me. It was fun to talk film with you guys again in front of a camera.
Is there anything you'd like to plug while you're here?
Not really. I am working on something, but I want to wait till it's a little more fleshed out before I announce anything. But that's pretty much taking up my free time at the moment. That and enjoying the immensely hot weather.
Aren't we all? But, you know, in this discussion, I noticed we never brung up a Vincent Price movie, which is interesting, isn't it, Andre?
Yeah, because right now, Super 7 has the reaction glow in the dark Vincent Price figures out. So if you want to go and buy that, we have our sponsor, Super 7. If you go and use the link that's in the description and use the code name AJ Epics, you could save 7% on that and anything else you want in the store. So go get it right now.
Theater of Blood,
Yes.
Genre film with some social messaging.
True.
Similar to The Menu.
Oh, see, and unfortunately, we did not bring that up until now. I believe that figure also glows in the dark, by the way.
I just mentioned
okay. Well, unfortunately, that ends our business for this week. But as you know, we always have unfinished business. And so until next time, we bid you adieu.
If you like this review, please be sure to like and hit subscribe to be alerted to new episodes in the future.